Really simple. You'll just go to our website, wblinc.org/academy. And when you get here, you'll see our main page and you can click enroll and it'll take you to this form where you're just gonna fill this out. It'll take you about 5 minutes. Once you submit this, you're enrolled in the Academy and you'll receive an email from me so you can pick the classes you'd like to take and join our Academy family. So we're an after-school program rooted in hip hop. So we have a bunch of classes that you may find interesting. You can go right to our website and go to our classes tab and you'll see some of them, from performing arts like hip hop theater, spoken word, hip hop dance, some of our business classes that are like a boss and walk it like I talk it, which would be more arts management and entrepreneur based. And then we also have things like our music classes, MCing and rapping and beat production and DJing. You can go to wblinc.org/academy to enroll.
Hi, Jason.
Hey, how are you?
What's going on?
Hey, man, not going on but the rent. I know I said that before, but we haven't been on for 2 weeks, so I'll say it again.
You got to sing it this time. Ain't nothing going on but the rent. You got to have a J. Oh, okay. That's not that. All right. What's going on, Jay? It looks like we're boys in the hoodies. We're grown men.
Right. No doubt.
Well, thanks so much for making time for today's show. I know that it is a holiday for many, and I really appreciate having this opportunity to check in with my brother from another mother about what's been going on in the world of leadership. You know, we've been talking about a lot of things that have been really popular in the media lately, but I feel like, in retrospect, thinking about 2022, it's been a year where people have been talking about leadership without naming it leadership. We're talking about kind of media responsibility, talking about hate speech, lots of different words that are all really connected to the fact that the people doing the things that they're doing have influence and are seen by some, not just as influencers, but as leaders, as people whose words carry weight and lead people to do things for the good and maybe not for the good. And it's interesting, this is our 21st episode. And I feel like, we've had some really good conversations about our own points of view, about leaders from the past, and leaders from the present have joined us to be able to share their thoughts around electoral politics, around community organizing, around corporate responsibility, and all these things I feel like are connected to the idea of leadership in the abstract. But I wonder what you think about kind of this moment in world history as we think about the role of leaders today.
You know, it's interesting. I think the role of leaders today is not far radically different than it has been throughout human history. You have all different kinds of leadership. You certainly have despots out there who, when we're thinking about this on a global political scale, we see, people that out there trying to assert their power and their leadership, whether it's Xi Jinping or whether it's Vladimir Putin or the various leaders in Africa or people all over the world. You have people who are trying to consolidate their power. Leaders have always tried to do that, bad leaders, I would say. And then you have, micro examples of good leadership where people are trying to, follow a particular moral code and most of the time listen to their constituents and are trying to better use their leadership in order to better their communities or better their country or better their world. So I think the model for leadership hasn't really changed over time, but we're seeing new avenues for leadership. So a lot of what people have been talking about is social media. And now we have someone like, Elon Musk. And I know that I don't know if you've been paying attention to the Twitter files, and one of the things that he's talking about is all these arbitrary decisions that were made by Twitter that weren't necessarily part of their bylaws, and government involvement and all of that kind of thing. Now, the interesting thing about that is now they are under the leadership of Elon Musk, who makes arbitrary decisions about who gets banned and who doesn't. And so, now it's the same kind of thing. We see the same kind of models for leadership, just new avenues for it.
I got to be honest. I would probably normally agree with that statement, but it's the nature of our conversations. There must be some level of disagreement, because I think about two people who are not necessarily mainstream leaders in the Black community. I think about someone like Tesling Figaro, and I think about someone like Dr. Umar Johnson. And I think one of the most interesting things about both of them is how their analysis is one thing, but they're both very guilty of creating thirst traps. Like this idea of using social media to not just gain following, but to kind of gain groupies. And so it's interesting to watch these folks. Like Tesla, I feel like her analysis is actually pretty strong, but she stays posting videos of herself showing off her body, trying to get the attention of men, and being really clear that she is single and ready to mingle. And I don't think that I can't really imagine Dr. King, even though he's married, or any of the leaders that were single back in the day, like at the end of a rally being like, and all of the ladies at the end, feel free to come and talk to me. Like I can't see it. But there's like, this is kind of dealing with respectability politics, but it's also just really different. This idea of using social media to not just get followers, but also to get donors and also to get, partners is I feel like is something that is new in terms of people like flagrantly doing it. And I'm not even mad at them for doing it, but I just think it's really interesting how often I might go to either one of their posts on social media, their interviews, and they're spending most of the time trying to find partners for bed as opposed to, people to be involved in the work that they want to do.
So I don't follow Teslin. We follow each other on Twitter, I think, but I don't follow her on Instagram, so I don't really know what she does. I would say Teslin is an influencer. I would not say she's a leader. I don't know what she leads. Who does she lead? You know what I mean? I think
the same thing that everybody else is leading, which is their followers, the people that are paying attention. Like when she goes live, 5, 10, 15,000 people tune in to see whatever it is she's talking about. So it's not just a matter of she shares her opinions. It's people care what she's doing, where she is, what she has to say. And to a degree, big her up when she's on Fox News or when she's on various social media channels or on Comedy Central with Charlemagne the God. So like she's not, she's got more viewers than us. But I think that this idea of using influence, like I think it's always been the case that many leaders have used their influence to get access to the opposite sex, or in some cases the same sex, right?
Absolutely.
But that's really different than advertising it in the actual stream, like showing yourself at parties and what it is that you're wearing, or talking about, the Nubian queens who need to come and wipe the brow of you. Like it's really kind of, on some levels, it's sensational because it gets people to tune in, but on another level, it feels like it's not dangerous is too strong, but it feels like it's making light of the role that they play, even as influencers, even as people whose opinions other people listen to. It feels like it diminishes their potential stature. But in Tesla's case, I think part of it has to do with the fact that she lost a lot of weight. Like when she first came on social media, she was a heavier set woman, and she's much more fit now, and so she's showing that off. And so I'm not mad at her for doing it. I'm just saying, does it diminish from her influence to be presenting herself up for engagement?
Well, obviously not. People are actually tuning into what she says. Maybe you should take your shirt off. what I would say is, I think again, and we don't need to get back into a debate about what leadership is.
But so what is an what's an influencer then? If she's not, if you don't think she's a leader, um, if you don't think she's a leader, what makes her an influencer and not a leader?
I mean, again, I feel like we've had this conversation several times.
No, but you called her an influencer. I called her a leader.
Yeah, I mean, which is weird because it's kind of a reversal. But I would say
I don't think she's a leader, but I think people are following her.
Yeah, no, I think people are following her in terms of hearing what she says. What exactly are they putting into action that she says? What exactly? Now, had you said Dr. Umar is a leader, I might actually agree with that because he's starting a school, allegedly, and he's doing all, he actually has, what's the other guy's name? The FBA. We had a long exchange on Twitter once. Tariq Nasheed. Like Tariq Nasheed, started a museum and he's like actually putting things into action. I'm not so sure that Teslin that I know of, and again, I don't follow Teslin, so I don't know. And I respect Teslin for her analysis.
I have seen her. I have seen her present footage of herself at rallies. Like she's out in the streets helping to organize people. Like she is a guest speaker. I mean, I think if leadership means you have to be building something, like there's not really a lot of. I mean, you. It sounds like this is the show where we both agree with our old positions. Where like you're saying, well, if she ain't building nothing, she ain't no leader. And I'm saying, well, if literally having followers, having people concerned about what you're doing, and being invited onto television to share your opinions is what goes for leadership today. Like she's a leader of today, whether we agree that she should be or not. That like if those are the standards for leadership, that people are paying attention to you, and you have influence over a conversation, she's got that.
Well, in that case, I think like the twerk team are leaders. I mean,
What's
guys
that?
pay attention to that. You know what I mean? Just being paid attention to and having followers doesn't make you a leader. I think you, again, I will add the nuance to my old position, which is you used to say, I'm not a leader, I'm a manager.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm saying you lead people in order to help an organization function or to build something to be greater than it currently is. To me, that's leadership. You know what I mean? Like now, if people just watched you and you talked about, this is arts management and you did a seminar on arts management, and what you're doing right now is not leadership. I talk on TV, and I don't consider that leadership. I think that that's giving your opinion and people listen to it, and that's cool.
Right. So let's do this, Jay. Because I think this is the episode where it's opposite day, where like you agree with my positions and I agree with yours. But this is what I'm not arguing that I think these folks are leaders. I'm saying that they are what goes for leaders today. That if we've already established that one of the challenges in 2022 is the absence of institutions or even an effort at institution building, then that idea of building things can't be the standard of what is leadership, unless your argument is there are no leaders, there are just influencers, there are just people who share opinions. If there's no organization behind them, it doesn't really count, because that's an interesting position for you to take at this point. And
yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is, I think that there are lots of leaders, and we've had a lot of them on this podcast or this program. Like we've had people who build small organizations. I'm not saying that we have the SCLC anymore or the NAACP, but we have.
Would you consider someone like Angela Davis to be a leader
today? I would say Angela Davis today. I guess you would call her a leader emeritus. You know what I mean? Like, I think she was once a leader, with her involvement with the Communist Party and with her involvement with with the Black Panther Party, not in a leadership role, but involvement. I think that she was once a leader, but I don't think she leads anything now that I'm aware of.
So I would suggest that. So what about the women that started the hashtag Black Lives Matter? Are they leaders?
Yeah, I would say they are. I'm not saying they're good leaders, but
tell me why.
Because they actually built an institution. There is Black Lives Matter, the hashtag, but they actually built Black Lives Matter, the organization. Again, not saying they were good leaders.
What about the woman that started the hashtag Me Too? Is she a leader?
Tarana Burke.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not educated enough to say much about Tarana Burke. I can't really say because I don't know what she did other than to create that hashtag, but I believe she's done other things in a leadership position. But I don't want you to come and like burst my bubble and be like, she didn't do that, because I really don't know. But I believe that she.
Well, let's assume all she did was create the hashtag and the things that came after that. Would knowing whatever it is, like I haven't studied her impact, but I'm aware of the hashtag. I'm aware of the interviews. I'm aware of multiple men who lost their jobs, some of whom are now in prison, as a result of that hashtag being popularized without an institution behind it. She didn't build a thing. She used an institution, i.e. Twitter, to get a conversation going that resulted in actions in the world. And so if that's all she did, in big air quotes, is she a leader?
If she didn't get on the ground and do the work, and all she did was create a hashtag,
but the work was also the
case. But I'm pretty sure she did some other things. But
I'm giving it to you. But the work is doing those interviews, popularizing the hashtag, getting more women to be able to out their bosses, out their former employers. Like that was the work, is creating space for women and men to be able to out men who were sexually harassing them, in some cases assaulting them. That's what she did. She actually created, because she popularized, along with people on social, the hashtag. Something happened without an institution. The institution, she basically kind of was, I forget what the name of that. I feel like it's called a guppy, but the things that swim along a shark to get the scraps that a shark leaves. Like she basically used Twitter, used major media networks to get the message out without needing to build an organization. Why can't that be a different approach to kind of mass influence for action? I mean, that's what the civil rights movement was doing in part, was using broadcast television and media to get their message out. The Panthers, to the best of my knowledge, were one of the few groups in the power movement that created a publication. Most civil rights organizations use larger media outlets. Some also created black newspapers too. But they used larger media outlets to tell their story. It feels like that's part of the legacy of that civil rights generation's effort, is how to use media to elevate your story.
Yeah, but I would say that civil rights generation, I'd say the most important part of their work was, creating the freedom schools, going and organizing marches, voter registration drives, and that was really the precursor to what we saw just now in Georgia and other places around the country. So I think that they actually built institutions.
So Stacey Abrams is a leader.
Say what?
So Stacey Abrams is a leader.
Yes. Absolutely.
What makes her a leader?
She not only had values and an ethos and saw a problem that needed to be solved, she actually used her influence to create an institution that battled voter suppression. So she didn't just talk about it, she actually built the institution that that basically flipped Georgia and made it easier to vote throughout the country, particularly in the South. So I think she's definitely a leader.
Does it matter that she lost?
Too, as far as I know.
Say that again.
And I was saying, I think Tarana Burke is too. I think she actually like got her nails dirty.
And so, does it matter that Stacey Abrams lost? Does it matter?
No. Being a leader. So I look at being a leader just like being a fighter. Are you not a fighter just because you got knocked out? No, you're still a fighter. You just got knocked out, or you're a warrior, or even if you lose a war, you're still a warrior. Like are you a leader sometimes when your cause is unsuccessful? Just like I said, there's bad leadership. That's
so
still
is Hillary Clinton a leader?
Yes. At one point, I don't know what she leads now, but I mean,
The Clinton Foundation,
right? Yeah. So yes.
And so the fact that she lost, that doesn't impact whether or not she's a leader. It's that she's still running some sort of an institution in the world.
Absolutely, and she built it too. Not saying that that's necessary, but that's part of it, part of her leadership.
So it's interesting because 20 episodes ago, this was not your argument. You're actually making what has been my argument for the entire series, which is just kind of interesting. I think, in the sense that I was arguing that the need to build a thing is actually an integral part to being a leader. Because with your Stacey Abrams example, right? Mm-hmm. So she was a part of building an organization that did get people to register to vote. Many of those people turned out to vote, but they didn't turn out to vote for her. So if part of the requirement based on your own description is the ability to build a thing and for people to support or follow, I don't know if you said follow, I think you might have said support, but I'm going to put words in your mouth and say, and follow you. If the fact that she could turn out a vote to actually flip Georgia on 2 consecutive electoral cycles, but in neither one of those could she actually get the majority of the vote in that state, who is she a leader of if the people that turned out to flip the state didn't actually vote for her?
So, number one, I think that she did. Well, her organization wasn't about Stacey Abrams. Her organization was about access to voting. And we saw record numbers of people, particularly Black people, voting because of her efforts. Now, I think had she been on the ballot in 2020, you might have seen something it might have been a little different. But there are a lot of reasons why I would say she lost, but we don't need to get into that.
No, let's get into it, because I'm wondering how much of the reason that she lost has to do with the fact that she's a woman. All the people I'm talking about are women, and how it is that women are approaching leadership, and how it is they're being received as leaders or dismissed as influencers because they don't have an institution behind them. And so, like, it's a relevant question to ask. What role does gender play in America in terms of selecting leaders? Are we still a country that's rooted in the idea that the people who should lead are men? We know that it's not just white men anymore, but it's still men. And what are the things that women have to do in order to be seen as, supported as, and acknowledged as leaders?
So I would say, I think that yes, we patriarchy still exists. We do have lots of women leaders. It's just for some reason we don't elect a lot of Black women to statewide office, and that's just a fact. We've never had a Black woman governor in our nation's history. So Stacey Abrams had a big glass ceiling to break. But you saw a lot of women that got elected in different places and beat men. Masto in Nevada. We saw 2 women run against each other in Arizona for the governor's mansion. We saw, women incumbents like like Hassan in New Hampshire, she won. So I mean, we see that there are women leaders and women who can win statewide races, but I would say it's the intersection of race and gender. And I think that there are also other factors in Stacey Abrams' loss.
Like
so number one, a lot of people compare it. There were people who voted for Brian Kemp and people who voted, those same people who voted for Warnock. Number one, Warnock faced a much weaker opponent. You know what I mean? Like a historically weak opponent. And he's faced historically weak opponents twice. You know, that's not to take anything away from Senator Warnock. I think he's great. But I think he has faced some of the weakest Republican opponents, you know, maybe in like electoral history at that point. And so Herschel Walker was particularly weak. I think Stacey Abrams faced a popular incumbent governor. And why was one of the reasons why I think some people voted for him, including some Black voters, was they were in favor of the way he dealt with COVID. I think a lot of them were looking at the COVID restrictions that happened around the country as being overly harsh. They didn't like the COVID mandates. They didn't like the vaccine mandates. And there were a lot of Black people who didn't necessarily agree with that. And they thought people like him and Ron DeSantis actually bucked against it. Also, he had some Black influencers who were at the very least agnostic on him. You know, people like Killer Mike, you know, who has, you know, some amount of influence in Georgia. So I think there were a lot of factors that, you know, boosted Brian Kemp over Stacey Abrams. And I think, you know, a lot of it was, you know, at the same time, there's that, you know, even though I don't love the term misogynoir, but I think there is some of, you know, there's anti-Black woman sentiment and people who don't like seeing Black women lead.
And I'm curious, what would you say is the root cause of that anti-Black woman leadership in America?
What is the root of it? I think it's patriarchy and white supremacy.
So then why does it uniquely impact Black women and not both Black men and Black women?
I mean, I think it does impact Black men and Black women. I just think, again, when it comes to leadership, Black women face the you know, the thing that we used to learn about dual oppression. Now, I think it's a lot more complicated. When we talk about dual oppression, it's a lot more complicated. But in this particular case, when it comes to leadership, I think there are some Black men. I'm not saying the majority. So, you know, the 7 of you who are watching, don't start tripping. But there are.
And we usually get 13. We get 13 viewers.
All right, that's what's up. There are some Black men who don't like seeing Black women lead. Because they see someone like Stacey Abrams, not only a Black woman, but a single Black woman, you know, a middle-aged, unmarried, single Black woman. I think there are some Black men, when you listen to what they say in the manosphere, they're sitting there and they're like, you know, should I finish? Because you seem very skeptical. Is there something?
No, go ahead.
You know? I think they're, you know, when you listen to some of these guys who are influential in the manosphere, they really don't like seeing, you know, they think it's Black women acting as though they don't need a man, and they talk bad about single Black women, and they certainly don't want them to be leaders, and, you know, and they're like, you don't need to make a lot of money, you need to get a husband and all that kind of stuff. So I think Stacey Abrams became almost like the poster child for that in the Deep South. And whether you know, I know Metro Atlanta, you don't think of Metro Atlanta as the Deep South, but Georgia is still the Deep South. And, you know, I think she may have fallen victim to some of that. But again, that's not why she lost. 84% of Black men voted for Stacey Abrams. That's a large percentage. So I'm not putting this all on black men. Don't get it twisted. I'm just saying there's a little bit of that. I think
it's funny. All the things that I've
popular incumbent governor.
All the things I've seen have actually talked about putting this at the foot of white women not showing up to vote for black women. And so it's interesting that the idea of patriarchy and white supremacy also meet an intersection with white women and their willingness to be able to support, particularly married white women who would vote for a woman, period, but then a woman of color secondarily. But we don't really talk about that. We always talk about that 84% of black men and how come all black people didn't do it versus where are the women? Like Hillary Clinton didn't lose because of black men. She lost because of white women. White women deciding not to show up, or people believing that there was no way that Trump could win, so they didn't show up at all. So they were like, yeah, she's a lot. I don't need to show up to vote. But this question about women showing up for women, what?
She's also a bad candidate. Like she doesn't run good races.
Yeah, I thought she was great. I thought she would have made a great president.
She may
far better than Trump.
I didn't say she was a bad leader. I said she's a bad candidate. I think those are two.
Yeah, people made the same argument about Biden. He's been a great president. So it's like this idea that campaigns are an indicator of how you'll govern is trash. And we have to accept that like charismatic speeches and kissing babies is really about shaping popular opinion, but not necessarily a reflection of the candidate's actual abilities to do the job. It's like people who
I didn't make that argument.
It's like people who are great interviewers, but terrible employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I didn't make that argument. You know what I mean?
Did.
I'm just saying, part of why she lost.
I'm saying people make that argument. I didn't say you made that argument. But I'm saying that argument is ridiculous. And we have to get to a point where we stop saying, the person who gives the best, like even this question of like the role of electoral politics in this idea of leadership. I've said this before many, many times. I really do think that there is a racial divide in America around what role electoral politics plays in terms of this idea of leadership. I really don't think that most black folks and people of color think about elected officials as leaders, but I definitely think most white folks in America think about elected officials as their elected representative leaders. They talk about them in a way that's different. They engage with them in a way that's different. They hold them accountable in a way that's different. And I think for that reason, we have different kinds of expectations. Like this idea that Republicans really want government that is not involved in your life and that doesn't tax you, but they want all the services versus, folks in Democratic states don't want the taxes either, but pay them because we want the services. And so like, recognizing that government elected officials are bureaucrats who manage our resources. They are not our leaders. They are representatives on our behalf or behalf of our states or districts for the things that we tell them that we want, not for them to guide us and tell us. And it feels like if that's the case, if I'm arguing elected officials from my own perspective are not leaders, and you're arguing that influencers who are the primary people in the ears of most Americans today in terms of trying to impact what they do and think and say are also not leaders. And we're narrowing leaders to the narrow group of people who create something that other people join.
So let me ask you this. Would you say that someone like Senator Elizabeth Warren, would you say she's a leader?
I would say that Elizabeth Warren is a leader, but not because of her elected role. I think it's because of the efforts that she makes to actually influence public opinion through writing, through lectures, through debates, that I feel like she would do in the same way that a Ralph Nader does outside of electoral politics. So yes, I would say that she is a leader within government. But also, I think that if she wasn't in government, she would be trying to exercise influence over these same things as just a regular citizen.
So I would say like she built something within government, like the Consumer Protection Agency. Mm-hmm. Like literally built that. So I don't think she runs it, but she certainly built it. And I think that makes, that's part of leadership. That is one element of leadership. I think, when you have influence over people's lives and people who don't even like you, still have influence over their lives. I think that's leadership. And Trump was an influencer before 2015. He became a leader after that. He became an influencer with.
Hold up. Why wouldn't you say he was a leader before that with the Trump organization, Trump
Yeah,
University, Trump Steaks, all of the businesses, the hotels, the golf courses?
That's fair. No, I agree. Good, fair. That's fair.
I mean, but this is a question of like leading a company makes you a leader. I just feel like it's a suspect definition, because by that right, anybody could be a leader if they create something and anybody joins them, versus this idea that leadership isn't just about joining. It's not just about partners. It's actually about people who are willing to follow. I feel like we come from a generation where this idea of following is kind of a dirty word. I think, it's been more popularized in social media, but the idea that you're a follower of someone, unless it's like someone who's dead, or who is believed to be dead. Those are the only people that people feel comfortable saying they follow, maybe other than their clergy. They follow their clergy. If that's the case, then we live in a society, let's not even make it about the world. We live in a society that is absent of leadership. We have institutions that operate on our behalf, that are managed by people, but rarely led. If that's the case, the name of this show is apropos. There are no new leaders. We are now at a place where we have a leaderless society that's filled with managers who operate larger systems that impact our lives. Am I frozen?
No, you're not.
Okay. I don't. And by the way, I don't actually believe that, but I'm saying if people don't, like, if when we ask people, who do you follow, the answers are usually a social media answer. They're not like, I read all the books of such and such, I watch all their lectures. If they're in town, I go see them. Like, the only people that I'm aware of where those kind of answers exist are clergy. And maybe some authors, like a Michael Eric Dyson, who's also clergy. But like, if he's showing up in your city to speak, I was looking at this video with Dr. Umar talking about he was going to be in Maryland back in September, trying to sell books to support that school / pay for his life. So like, this blending of what it means to be an author, to be an organizer, to be an influencer, to be a leader, is, I think, just interesting how willing we are to call some things leadership and not willing to call other things leadership. Like, I think that the work that happened as a result of Me Too, and even as a result of Black Lives Matter, didn't need organizations to have the impact that they had. They needed an awakened public who was willing to do something about, whether that was boycott, whether that was, to unfollow, or to call for the resignation or the firing or the jailing of X, Y, and Z person. Like, it's a bunch of people in jail and out of work because of that hashtag, and the people that decided to align themselves with that hashtag. This idea that hashtag activism isn't really activism or isn't really leadership, I don't know. I feel like it's leadership in this moment, and leadership in this moment looks different because the ways in which we engage with institutions, corporations, elected officials is really different than it's been in the past.
So I think hashtag. I think you can lead virtually. I will agree with that. If all you did was make a hashtag, but the other people decided, there are people around the country applying it in different ways, and you have no kind of control over how they do that, who they go after, I'm not so sure that necessarily means you are a leader. Like, I can make a hashtag, I don't know. I don't like bald guys or something like that, right? there are other people who could go and make that a hashtag against people with alopecia or something. You know, it could be cruel. Like, I didn't lead that. I was just trying to make fun of my friends. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that, again, I'm not sure that that's leadership. Now, if I say I don't like, you know, bald guys, and I'm the guy who's directing how that hashtag is applied. All of those people are looking to me to see how to apply that hashtag. I'm organizing, or at least in contact with different people who are doing, you know, anti-baldness rallies around the country. Like, then I think, you know, that's leadership. But just because I created a hashtag, that doesn't make, you know, that's not leadership, in my opinion.
So here's what's interesting. We are both a part of a community that is leaderless. That is the hip hop community. Who is the leader or the leaders of hip hop? Never has been, never will be. There are several.
There have been leaders in hip hop,
Who?
but you wouldn't consider like Bambaataa a leader in hip hop? Zulu Nation, that was like a global movement.
I would consider that to be an organization that he was the head of. Yes, I would.
Yeah, so I would say Bambaataa was a leader in hip hop at one point. And I think that there have been, you know, because of the very close relationship between, you know, early hip hop and gangs, you know, gangs had leaders. And so I think that there was, you know, leadership within hip hop, but as it grew as a, you know, grew as a global subculture or culture, I don't, you know, I think you're right. I think you've had a bunch of influencers.
But I would also argue that Bambaata's influence was over his organization, not over hip hop as a movement. Just like my influence as a leader of Words, Beats, and Life is over my organization, not over hip hop nonprofits globally. And so understanding the difference between being a manager or a leader internal to your organization or your company. You know, I think is really interesting is that we don't want to say that the real leaders of today are companies. You know, this whole idea that Republicans argued that corporations are people, that corporations exercise, you know, outsized influence over most of our lives, from what it is that we wear to what it is that we see to where it is we go. The corporations are the primary leaders, and the currency of leadership is literal money. Do you have the ability to pay? Can more people see what it is that you're doing because you have the ability to afford that? As opposed to thinking about leaders as just people, that the role that platforms like YouTube and Instagram and Twitter all play in the information that we receive. They are the new gatekeepers, taking the place of NBC and CBS and ABC, or the Washington Post or the New York Times. That these new media outlets that are not managed like media platforms, but are managed as social media platforms, don't have the same kinds of guardrails put in place to be able to protect us as consumers from whatever it is that they put out. There's no kind of liability, or very little, as compared to like a newspaper. So I think that part of the reason why this is confusing is because of the kind of decentralization of information, the process of building institutions. Like, we have people that consider themselves to be institutions, as opposed to needing to build an organization. And I feel like that's part of the shift that's happening. Why I wanted to do a show called No New Leaders is because people are getting things done without needing to build an organization, without needing or to be a part of a large existing one. You know, that it's more about the change they want to make in the part of the world that they're in, as opposed to changing the whole world. You know, it feels like one of the things that's happened as a result of the civil rights movement is we've seen kind of the results of those efforts, whether those were assassinations or whether those were the defunding of organizations, that we've seen the results of 20, 30 years of struggle, and we are now the children or grandchildren of that generation. And what is it that we want to do? Do we actually want to change the system, or do we want to be a part of the system? Do you want a system? And I feel like the answer to that question, for the most part, is those latter those latter answers, as opposed to trying to build an independent system. I don't remember if I talked to you about this, because I think I heard this story on NPR between our last show and this one, that there are 150 companies that run water distribution throughout the United States of America. One of the things we often talk about is building institutions, but we very rarely talk about buying existing institutions. Like the brother that's buying up those weather channels around the country. He's a great example of someone who didn't say, I'm going to start something from nothing. And he's like, no, I've got money. I'm going to buy existing things. Like, I feel like part of, if business is the new language of leadership, questions about how we're building or buying businesses has got to be a central part of the conversation.
Yeah. So yeah, I think about a lot of people who are, buying institutions, because there really is no way. I mean, you can try and build things from the ground up, but why not actually take something that already exists and reshape it? I think, I don't know how he's reshaping the Weather Channel, but I know that he did Weather Channel Latino, and started doing the weather in Spanish. He had a greater vision for something that already existed. Even when you're looking at someone like Elon Musk, he didn't create Tesla. He just came in and muscled everybody out and made the relationships with China and, Russia and other places to be able to create these cars, cheaply. And recognized environmental trends and all of that, and realized that this was going to be something that was important and viable. And now he was the wealthiest man in the world. So yeah, I think, buying institutions, but I think, when it comes to our community, I think that also leads us into a discussion about the lack of wealth in our community. We can't even buy stuff within our community. So there aren't many Byron Allens out there that can say, hey, this is an institution. I can build it. I can build it out. I can, take what's already been done and add my vision to it, when there's just a lack of wealth within Black communities.
Right, but we can begin to have the conversation. I would argue that part of the reason why most of us are not thinking about buying things that already exist is because no one's talking about that. Everyone's always talking about starting your own business, being able to get your own bag. But what if we started to actually just think about, and this for me, this became, a question, this water piece became something to think about when people were talking about Jackson, Mississippi, and talking about Flint, like, sending bottles of water, or someone like Will Smith's son sending water filtration systems. But the question became for me, like, if Black folks don't own any of the companies that are responsible for water filtration, then we're always going to be at the mercy of other communities or companies to be able to come in and provide for us. So having conversations about the process of purchasing infrastructure, like electric company, like this is the thing, like a lot of times we're interested in restaurants and clothing and food and maybe travel agencies or nonprofits, but who's really having the conversation about purchasing waterworks, not just getting a hotel, really talking about owning the means of distribution for a community that isn't just ours. Like a lot of times this idea of Black businesses are about creating businesses for the Black community, which is laudable and important, especially if we're talking about circulating dollars within our community. At the same time, everybody's money spends the same. So if you can create a business that provides a service to everybody, why are we talking about that? And maybe it's not that it's not happening. It's not a conversation I've been witnessing or a conversation I've been a part of. And I think part of our responsibility is to really ask questions, not because we're necessarily going to buy a water company. I'm working on trying to buy my first house. But I am very much so interested in how we transition to a place where our money starts to work for us and not just be spent on things that we want. How is it that we talk about, a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about investing in HBCUs. Neither one of us went to an HBCU, but I think I might start giving to Howard because it's here in DC. or maybe Bowie State, because I know a bunch of people who work at Bowie State. We've got a number of students that go there. Like this idea of investing in institutions that benefit our communities and building institutions or buying institutions that impact the larger community that benefit the owners of those communities. I feel like that's the conversation around leadership and vision that is different than a civil rights generation conversation around integration, around being seen as equal, around being able to live next to whoever you want. Like if Jay-Z had, if Mos Def didn't just do a song called New World Water, but actually bought a filtration system, if he, brought a bunch of people together, because he'd have to cobble that money together, that's powerful. That's a power move. And it's not just something that benefits the Black community. It's Black ownership benefiting a whole community.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think you absolutely, I think we do need business owners that are Black, not just Black business owners. And if that makes any sense. I think we definitely need to serve other communities in addition to our own. But the thing is, our community is being served by others. So I think a lot of people are like, yo, corner your own market first, own businesses, own land in your own community, and then we can expand out. So I think that, that is part of the issue. But I also think, again, and this isn't what you're saying, but I think this idea that Black capitalism is going to save Black communities, like having a bunch of Black-owned businesses in Black communities, people have talked about that forever, and it's never worked for Black communities. It's always been something that every president has said, I'm going to give such and such $1 billion to Black-owned, businesses to help, them so you can own the Wendy's in your community. You know what I mean? And that never does anything for the community as a whole. If you do have wealthy people, and one of the things that I think is important is like with the tech sector, is now there are going to be more jobs in tech than there are in construction. And moving forward. So if we can get entrepreneurial dollars, if we can get Black venture capitalism, so that Black people can actually start businesses, and sometimes, some of the people who are, maybe not innovators themselves can go and buy, like you said, water filtration and things like that. I think that could make a very big difference, for our community. I think if Mos Def had bought that water filtration system, let's say he did that, what does that do for anybody other than Mos Def? That's my question. How does that help the larger community or humanity as a whole, if you want to take it out of Black people? How does that really help? What it does is make Mos Def wealthy and in control of a lot of our infrastructure, or an important part of our infrastructure. It doesn't necessarily help the community as a whole, especially if he doesn't live in the community or spend money there, or send his kids to school there and all the things like that. So I'm not convinced that is the way forward for Black communities as a whole. But I do think things like venture capitalism for Black innovators, because we made a lot of these social media apps pop. We always talk about Black Twitter. And the truth is, and this is something that our dear brother Jared Ball would say, there is no Black Twitter. There's Twitter being used by Black people to, chop it up and have a good time. You have Clubhouse. We made Clubhouse pop, but Black people don't own it. Nobody's really, there have been some Black social media apps that have started, but haven't been able to catch traction amongst Black people. So I think that, one of the things that people talk about with Black businesses is that we first need Black support in order for it to pop off. You see, what's his name, who owns the Weather Channel? One of the big parts of his brand is the griot, because he realizes he needs Black support, and he needs support within his own community.
So a couple of things. One, I think the answer to your question about how does it benefit Black folks or Black communities if Mos Def owns a water treatment plant. I think the answer depends on how it is that he does it. Does he do it by borrowing from a Black bank, which often lends to Black businesses and Black communities? Does he populate it with engineers and people who have gone through HBCUs to be trained in the field of water filtration and distribution, purification? It depends on how you build it. You know, it's not just Black for its own sake, but Black building an institution. Like, you know, one of the things I say all the time is Words Beats in Life is not a Black-owned business. It's not a Black business, but it is a Black-led organization that serves humanity. And I think that to me is the model for Black entrepreneurship, is to recognize the value in Black leadership, but also in the value of serving everybody. That Macy's, when I went to Macy's yesterday, getting my holiday sweaters, the people that were shopping there, overwhelmingly Black. People working there, about 50-50. So Black folks working there, Black folks shopping there. Are there Black brands in Macy's? Yep, there are. And so that there, again, it's that model of saying you can be a part of something that's bigger or you can own something. And the idea that because only a Black person benefits from owning this business, it's not a worthy endeavor is silly. Because ultimately, all of those businesses, all of those water filtration companies, to the best of my knowledge, which isn't very extensive, are all owned by white business owners. So how are we benefiting? How are the folks in Flint and Jackson benefiting from companies that aren't owned by members of their community? We see the results. So I talked about the way that he would build the company, but also I would also say that if his company had the expertise for how to fix the water filtration system, suddenly when there's a disaster, the same way that when there's a fire or a tornado or earthquake, the Red Cross gets called in. Wouldn't it be really interesting if the expertise of Black-owned companies could actually come in to help fix or buy? If there was a way to force people that poorly run utilities that serve Black communities to force them to sell, you know, like it seems like there's some new fights to be had. And if business is going to be the model for leadership moving forward, I think that we got to get away from this idea that only a few Black people benefit. If they're actually providing services that benefit the whole community, great for them. Let them benefit and let them provide a service that is critical to the larger community.
So it's interesting. I actually a while ago read about Black-owned banks, and you know, not even in Mirza Badaradan's book, but there was another article recently that I was reading that said that Black-owned banks have a combined. There are 19 Black-owned banks today. There used to be over 100 before the Depression, and that number has just slid down further and further and further. And there are, I believe, 19 Black-owned banks, and they have a combined $7 billion of assets.
Do you know why that is?
But wait, let me just finish this point before we go into that.
I just want to say before you go, I just want to say this. You're also just talking about Black American.
Right.
Talking about the banks in Africa. Go ahead, bro.
Okay. Yeah. So here in the United States, if you're going to get a loan from a bank in the United States, they have $7 billion worth of assets, and that's in every Black-owned bank. That's like the total. So again, one of the things that Badaradan says in her book is, like, you know, in The Color of Money, is that everybody who used to say, you know, like in Powernomics, you know, Black banks are the way, we need to invest in Black banks. Black banks are going to, and there just isn't enough wealth within the community to really do that. I don't know what the water filtration costs, you know, what it would cost to buy the water, you know, infrastructure in Jackson, Mississippi, for example. But I do know that Mayor Chokwe Lumumba said that the repairs to modernize the water system in Jackson was going to take billions. So if there's $7 billion total, and it's going to take billions with a plural, with an S at the end, there really isn't a lot of capital within Black banks here in the United States. Now, if you're going to go to a bank overseas and all that, sure, go for it. But here in the United States, that's going to be difficult. Also, most def would have to have assets that, banks think are worthy to make that kind of a lend. Now, as far as the engineers, I'm totally and wholeheartedly with you. Only point that I'll make there is something that might upset some people, but look, there are Black students at PWIs that need jobs too. So I just want to make it clear. I have Black students at the University of Maryland, and a lot of them look for jobs, and people, those employers go to HBCUs because they want the critical mass of Black students. But we have really excellent Black students who don't go to HBCUs, who also need to be part of that conversation and need to be recruited. So, those companies need to recruit at other universities as well, recruit Black students at other universities as well. But no, I agree with your point. If you can control the infrastructure, if we had more Black-owned grocery stores and Black-owned, water filtration, if you own the infrastructure for food, housing, and water, that's a really good start.
Right. But to your point, though, right, it's not just about owning those things. It is about saying, like, at your local grocery store, are they buying at your local Giant or Safeway, or where are they buying from Black farmers? If they're sourcing locally, where are they sourcing from? So it's not just about saying, let's build up exclusively Black-owned things, but saying that there is a difference, that can be made when the services that are being provided are to your own community, to folks that come from where you come from or don't. Like, they come from communities that you recognize you have resources to be able to help impact. And I agree with you that it's not, what I'm proposing is not simple. If it was, it would have happened already. Like, there have been concerted efforts to prevent Black ownership of multiple things, whether that's banks. Like, you're saying that there's only $7 billion in all Black banks combined. But I guess the real question is, how many Black dollars are banked, period? That would be another number worth learning. But per usual, you get warmed up at the end. Jay, I want to thank you for tuning in, especially when you could be with your kids and your wife on this Christmas day. I really appreciate you taking time. Love the hoodie. I'm actually going to send you a couple of new ones so you can stop rocking that 10-year anniversary joint. All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. This is No New Leaders. I'm Mazi. That guy over there, that was Jason Nichols. He a G. I love that brother. Peace, y'all.